All right, well, I will begin with a quick introduction of our panelists, and then we will dive right in. First, and this is in no particular Zoom screen order, because I believe everybody's Zoom screen looks a little bit different. First is Maggie Jesse. She's the Senior IT Director for the ITS Office of Teaching, Learning, and Technology at the University of Iowa. Next, Sara Marcketti is the Director for the Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching at Iowa State University. Third is Jonathan Brand. He is the President of Cornell College in Mount Vernon. And then fourth, we will have a panelist joining us in a couple minutes. He's transitioning between classroom and online, and that is Michael Smith, and he's a professor of information technology and marketing at Carnegie Mellon. And so I say welcome and thank you to everybody for participating today. And I think to kind of kick us off, if each of you could maybe take a couple minutes to talk about what online learning looked like pre-COVID, and then maybe as COVID and that situation emerged, how did you respond, and what did online learning kind of become as we've moved forward? And Maggie, I'll let you kick off.
Thanks, Zach. You started with me, so I guess I'll jump in. I want to say, too, that one thing that I really miss, and I've just noticed it here, is for conferences, not just teaching, all the online we've done. I miss all the chitter chatter at the beginning where we get to see people and gain some energy from the people that are in the room. And I know the faculty are missing that immensely as well. So I'll be very happy when we get back to that. So to your question, for many years, I had a very robust online learning course delivery program through our distance and online learning department. And their design of online courses has always been a very planful process, made through curricular decisions with the department, with the faculty, what works well online, what could transition there, what do students need. With a faculty member teamed up very closely with an instructional designer. So we've had that for many, many years, and it had its process and its methodology. What we've been trying to be clear about at Iowa is that what we're experiencing right now is not really online in that way. This is a virtual learning in a global crisis. And that's very different. We've learned a lot. There's a lot that we can gain from this, but we don't want people to confuse this or conflate this online learning, or what we call virtual learning, with what we had before or what it may look like in the future. You asked about the switch. The initial switch in the spring was super fast. We had very little time to think about it or do it. We just had to do it, but we learned a lot. And in the months leading up to the fall of 2020, we were able to be much more intentional and much more planful, but still not at the level that we would if it were a fully online course, or fully online courses. So I just want to make that distinction right off the bat.
I think at Iowa State University, very similarly, we had about 7% of our courses be fully online. And then if you can think about in spring 2020, once the pandemic hit, we had 100% of our courses go online. That semester, we had about 2,000 courses already had some online presence. And then we had to rapidly help faculty transition 4,000 additional courses to that online or virtual environment. This semester, we have about a third of our courses in that online environment. And I think similarly to University of Iowa, we really had to really think about the needs of our students immediately. Do they have laptops? Do they have Wi-Fi connection? And then think about, okay, how do we get that material online in a really meaningful way for the students to engage very deeply, as we've tried to do and tried to transition now as we're about 3 semesters into the pandemic.
Well, I'll jump in and say, boy, which one of these is not like the others? So before COVID, we had 0 courses offered in a virtual or remote format. And this is really going to be, I can't even believe I would think this or had thought this. But if you had asked me a year ago what the greatest technological innovation of the last 100 years is, I would say the seminar table. And so we had we're in an association called the Associated Colleges of the Midwest, Grinnell, Luther, Carleton. We had all come together to offer one online course in calculus. It did not generate huge interest among the students of any of our schools. But like Iowa State, many schools, we had to, in a matter of a week, a year ago, revamp everything. And we ended up, except for some of these core courses we mentioned earlier, before the session started, lab sciences, for example, we moved 90% of our courses into a remote or virtual format, where 80% of our courses were available in person or virtually. And there were very few that were just in an online version. And so that's sort of been our story for the last, I mean, there are lots of granular stories in there, but that was sort of our move a year ago, realizing that students could take classes in a virtual format, but still be on campus. You know, even that for me was sort of strange to think about, that once you offer a class online or virtually, a student can be anywhere.
Mm-hmm. Michael, I'm curious, kind of the experience at Carnegie Mellon.
So I think I'm here to stir the pot, and so I'll cheerfully stir. I think Zoom education has been worse, except for the parts that have been better. And there've been a decent number of parts that I would argue have been better. You know, I just got out of I've been teaching since 7:30 this morning, 7:30 your time this morning. So I taught two sections, and then I had a guest lecture from a guy named Chris Anderson, who wrote a book called The Long Tail, which is the topic we're talking about on Monday. Why was I able to get Chris Anderson? Because I was able to say, hey, Chris, would you be willing to spend 80 minutes talking to my students over Zoom? He would have never flown to Pittsburgh. So all of a sudden, I'm bringing in, great people who we would have never had access to before because we're on Zoom. The reason, Zach, I think you asked me here was because I wrote a piece back in the Atlantic in June that said, my area of research is on how technology disrupts industries. And I just finished a book on how technology disrupted the entertainment industry around 2015. And in June, I wrote an article in the Atlantic that said, we in higher education in 2020 look exactly like the entertainment industry did in 2015. We are absolutely convinced that technology will not disrupt our way of doing business. And again, to stir the pot, I think we're dead wrong.
Well, and I think we'll get into some of that. It's going to be a lively conversation. But I wanted to spend a little bit of time kind of talking about the things that were learned, because, Maggie, to your point, you talk a lot about it's very thoughtful and deliberate, and there are things that go into the planning of a college course, and I've been amazed at some of the advisory boards that I've been on, how long it takes to normally get some of those things put together. But you put this together almost overnight comparatively. And I'm curious, the things that you've learned, what's worked particularly well, what in the model needs to be rethought? Are there types of classes that maybe could lend themselves longer term this way? Or what have been the most interesting learnings to this point so far?
If you're focusing that at me, I would say the first thing is I'm not going to go through and say this is an absolute course that can move online and this is one that should never. Those are really our decisions that happen at the department and the curricular level. There are also faculty who have their own ways that work best for them and how they engage with their students. The things that we did learn are things about, actually they're ancient things about human interaction and connection. So where we can maintain human interaction and engage with our students, we've seen that that's incredibly important. We've learned how quickly we can get feedback from students and faculty and help one another make adjustments as we needed to. Zach, yes, we like to be planful, but we've also had to learn to be really flexible and move when we need to and not wait. And it works okay, and that's fine. We're also doing a lot of collecting data. And I think, you said we would possibly talk about data and evaluation. So many more opportunities in this environment to do some of that kind of work, to do research on what happened here. We're a research institution, really interested to see what comes out of that research. So that's what I would add to the conversation.
I think to follow up on that, one of the things that we learned in the online environment was this balance between structure and flexibility. So I think we use Canvas as our learning management system, and we have a ISU course template that has, for faculty, put your objectives here, put your syllabus here, students upload your homework here. And I really think for students, it helped create that structured environment that they need to succeed. And we know, is helpful when we're dealing with all sorts of courses and disciplines. But that flexibility really came in as faculty experienced themselves in a pandemic, that, meeting a 5 o'clock deadline might not always be possible when you're dealing with family or other obligations. And so I think that was one thing that we learned both individually and then as an institution, that kind of a balance between structure and flexibility. I think the access piece is huge too. People can be all over the state, as Michael mentioned, all over the world, and really zoom into classes, both as a student, but also as a presenter, which is huge.
Yeah, and if I can just even contribute to this, I spend a lot of my time focused on process. And higher ed, as you know, we're not known, and this Michael sort of gets at this, we're not known for being the most innovative sector in the country. We like to say, you give us a decade, we can do some great things. And I think COVID taught lots of our schools that we're a lot more flexible and innovative than we think we are. I mean, in a matter of a week, our faculty completely revamped the curriculum so that we could move it into a more flexible format. And I'm hoping, I think that was something that we learned, at least at Cornell, is that, we can do things. We actually don't have to be stuck in our ways. And maybe we haven't been in the past, but at least there's that perception about us from outside of higher education. And I think the aversion to technology, the aversion to online learning or remote learning, I think it's gone. And that's a huge step forward for higher education.
I'll jump in and say one of the things that was really interesting for me on Carnegie Mellon's campus is we thought that we were going to do hybrid, but the vast majority of students were going to show up. And so the idea was, in a class of 40 students, we're going to do a hybrid class for those 5 or 6 students who can't make it to campus, and everybody else is going to want to be in the classroom. And what we discovered is on the first day of class, 4 students showed up. And on the second day of class, 2 students showed up, and then it was completely online. I don't know what to make of that, quite frankly.
Yeah. Well, and I was curious, and maybe that's a segue into some of the discussion about data and analytics. I am curious for folks, what has participation looked like? How closely are you tracking that? To Michael's point, are you looking at how many students stay with a class when they're engaging in the class? Is it still that habit? What data are you able to look at, and any insights as to what it's showing?
Faculty, I think one of the things as a good teaching practices is to seek feedback. Are your students paying attention? Are they turning in the assignments? How are they doing with their learning on these assignments? And in some ways, the online environment helped that. You can see, how long did it take a student to answer a quiz question? How frequently did they interact in that Canvas environment? And I think from an instructor standpoint, that can be very valuable versus having to wait until the next week when you'll see the students again, right? So it gives students additional opportunity to interact with course material. Grades are also another a metric that we can use, especially as we teach a course over and over again to see, do those grades stay the same or are there dips? I think at the institution level, or the grades did not take a significant dip for the online learning.
I can jump in here and say, one of the things that's really interesting to me is how bad Zoom, let me rephrase. Zoom is not optimized for online learning. Zoom is video conferencing on steroids. one of my colleagues who teaches probably our hardest class, which is sort of statistics for everyone, no matter what your background is using actually a different learning management system that gives him almost a dashboard of where everybody is in the class. So you can sort of see, you know, Maggie's doing really well and she's already on lecture 7. Jonathan appears to have fallen behind. Let's give him more attention.
That's me.
All of a sudden we can really personalize. We can use the data to personalize the education.
Yeah.
And that to me is insanely exciting.
Yeah, and I think a school like Cornell is behind the curve in that sort of technological innovation. I mean, that it's helpful. I think we know going forward, and I know we'll talk about the future later in this session, what innovation will make, what will be available for us is very different from what we currently recognize as available to us. I mean, it had been triaged. So it's sort of exciting to know that that technology will permit a more personalized experience. I will say at Cornell, interestingly, 80% of our students came back to campus, and the mix between a virtual and in-person has largely actually been guided by positivity rates on campus. So for example, in October, the numbers will seem shocking for any larger school. We had 11 students test positive in one day, and we thought, okay, the world is coming to an end here. And we asked faculty, we didn't tell faculty what to do. We asked them to move everything online for a week to a virtual format. And that probably guided more than anything. Our students overwhelmingly wanted to be in the classroom, which we know by the numbers that came back to class, but positivity rates guided what was really possible.
I'd like to address this. A couple of people have said it, that faculty need this data. And that's where we've been focused, is with faculty who want to team with us to develop dashboards or reports or information specifically about how they're using Zoom or a lecture capture system, a certain test. Have them tell us the questions they're trying to answer and how we can find the data to help them do that. We have a lot of data. All of our schools have a lot of data, but we're all still learning. What does the data mean? How do we interpret the data? We have to be very careful about how we do those things and not jump to conclusions, especially in a world that's swirling around us right now. But teaming up with faculty to do some of those things to help them adjust on the fly where they're interested in doing it has been really an exciting place for us the last year.
Maggie and Sara, I'll ask kind of in your role as IT, I'd be curious, what is your capacity to work with some of the faculty? Because I would imagine, given your choice, you wouldn't take 4,000 classes online and then suddenly, yes, we'll give you individual feedback and coaching. What is the capacity and how are you able to kind of work with, faculty to, dive in?
Well, I think, so I represent our Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching. And just like our students in the online environment, some faculty really want a website and resources. So we made sure, to really spend a lot of time on the website. We saw a 60% increase up to about 60,000 unique visitors every month. I mean, just is huge for us. So we made sure we had those resources for faculty that maybe wanted to interact on their own time. But then we also tried to develop 20-minute lectures. So these were just 20-minute Zoom sessions, get to know how to use WebEx or Zoom or PowerPoint or anything, just a very brief. But then we also designed a 4-day experience, really focused on course design in the online environment. And this walked faculty members through, do your assignments align with the course objectives? Are you creating an inclusive environment for your students? So I think faculty could really select what they needed based on their skill level, based on their comfort level, based on their time that they had available, from just very short to a very in-depth experience.
At Iowa, we did almost the same thing Sarah's talking about, and we teamed up with our colleagues across campus, our colleagues across the state of Iowa, and our colleagues across the Big Ten. We shared web resources. We created a Keep Teaching at Iowa site. We developed a podcast series where faculty who were living this could get on a podcast for 5 minutes and talk about the things that had worked really well, and others could listen. Because faculty, just like students, they ingest information and they use information in very different ways depending on where they're coming from. So we tried to provide lots of different opportunities for people to do that. But you know, the heavy lift of this was on the faculty. So what we tried to do is find things we'd already created, repackage them, develop new things, just be responsive to whatever they wanted. And we didn't forget the students. This was a new place for most of our students. They came here for a residential experience. So we created in collaboration with our distance and online education folks, a Keep Learning at Iowa. So what is this new environment going to look like for me to learn? And how will I manage my time? And how will I engage with my faculty? There were just so many ways to do this and so many people to turn to. My colleague at Iowa State, wherever we turned to, we got help. So
I would say also colleagues in the departments. I mean, we heard over and over again about, you know, official buddy systems of faculty members working together, and then informal, you know, just someone who had experience doing quizzes online would hold a session for their departmental colleagues. So while there was a lot of stress, I think we also saw a lot of people share their talents and their expertise with their immediate colleagues, and even students, right? Telling their instructors, hey, you forgot to open the quiz, or have you considered doing this? And I think a lot of faculty listen to their students on how to make the experience even better.
You know, Michael, you kind of mentioned some of this in remarks already, but you know, you talk a little bit about the comparisons to the entertainment industry, and I'm curious, you know, do you see you know, more investment coming into, you know, if Zoom isn't the platform, it's, you know, I believe you said conferencing on steroids. Do you see, you know, a period of disruption coming of additional investment in some of these platforms?
Yeah, I do. I think there's an insane amount that we could do just in terms of investing in understanding the data and thinking about how to use the data to improve student learning. A platform I would encourage you all to look at is Outlier.org. It's made by the folks who started Masterclass, and the University of Pittsburgh provides course credit. So if you're curious, go to YouTube and look up Outlier trailer, and what you'll see is they're doing really cool things that use the technology to do what the technology does best. I think when I saw the entertainment industry transition to technology, what they initially did was they looked at the new technology as a way to do all of their existing practices. So they looked at it, you know, we've always sold DVDs, now we can sell movies online. What they didn't see was Netflix or Spotify, which is just a completely different way of consuming content. I think we in higher education look kind of similar. You know, we look at MOOCs and say, oh, let's do what we've always done online, lectures to an anonymous audience, and let's just bring that over to the new channel. I think we're going to see a bunch of innovation around what's the best way for students to learn. It might not be listening to me yammer on for 80 minutes.
You know, Jonathan, to your point too, I mean, I'd be curious your thoughts as, you know, I would think that this changes almost the attraction or, you know, recruiting to campus. And we're coming out of a period of time where the traditional college visit, I would think, has been difficult to achieve, if not entirely online. But it's different to visit a campus online than it is to, you know, feel the energy in the morning. How do you see, you know, some of that potential for tech disruption, or does that change the opportunities for collaboration or competition with some of the, you know, other programs and campuses?
So thanks. So I appreciate the question. I think it's interesting. So our students overwhelmingly, and I think this is the challenge of the moment, our students overwhelmingly, and I think lots of students across the country are craving a person-to-person experience still.
Mhm.
And so actually lots of schools across the country are seeing enrollment increases right now because students are desperate to get back to some of those in-person experiences. The challenge of the moment is technology still has to play a role in it. And so the sort of exciting question is now how to blend the various modalities into some sort of personalized experience. So for example, and I don't know whether this will be possible, knowing that students want to be on campus, at least the students who we attract, or at least students who enter into our prospect pool, the question is how to extend that learning experience with technology. It has an in-person component, but then has some sort of seamless availability of technology to add to it. That's, I think, going to be really the sort of exciting educational question for a school like Cornell, and maybe for other schools, is not what does it mean for specific disciplines? What does it mean for all of our disciplines? How does this make the in-person experience better? But then how does it extend what students can do in their learning? And an epiphany that I had last week, somebody said this to me, and that became an epiphany for me, is that, and this is where Michael's comment about innovation, I think, is so important. Our students expect their technological experiences with an educational institution to be every bit as good as the technological experiences they're having outside of higher ed. So in their private lives, they are experiencing technology in a really powerful and exciting way for them. And they expect higher ed to deliver that same experience for them. And that's where what we offer has been clunky and difficult. I mean, that's, to me, the epiphany, is whatever we do has got to be as good for our students as what they're experiencing off campus in their private lives.
I think some faculty have seen that too. Just recording a lecture 60 minutes and posting it online is not very exciting. When you can stream something from Netflix or from Amazon or from Prime, you can see the next episode immediately. So I think a lot of instructors are seeing, okay, how about a short video? Students can access it. They can get ahead with their material and not just sit there. I think for faculty too, it's not much fun, right? To just talk straight for 60 minutes. That doesn't really work.
Michael, it looked like you had a point that you were itching to make there a second ago.
Oh, I was going to jump in and drop the Outlier trailer into the chat.
Okay.
So my daughter is a high school junior, and she took Outlier over the summer. And what's really interesting about what they do is they actually have 3 different professors teaching exactly the same topic in a different voice. So they've got Hannah Fry, who is a British mathematician talking about calculus, and then they've got, I've forgotten his name. Anyway, they've got another guy teaching it, and then they've got John Urschel, who was the starting guard for the Baltimore Ravens and is now an all but dissertation math PhD at MIT teaching it. And they use different examples. And what was really interesting to me is they say, take the class from whoever you want. And if you don't understand what this person's lecture is, listen to someone else. My daughter, who is president of the STEMinist club at her high school, so STEMinism is a thing, immediately gravitated towards Hannah Fry as a woman. And I was mentioning this to a colleague, and she said, "Oh yeah, there's a bunch of research that says that women learn statistics better from women in business school. That they see the female faculty member as a mentor." And I don't know if there's any research on this. John Urschel is an African-American guy. I could certainly imagine a world where if you're a Black or brown kid who's never had a Black or brown math professor, that you might really benefit from learning from John Urschel. We just can't do that in the classroom because you got to hear it from me. Wouldn't it be cool if you could choose your example and your professor?
I wanted to explore for a second, one of the last earlier sessions was about a la carte and this idea that, maybe you don't necessarily have to be in the exact same campus. And I'm curious, I mean, Sara and Maggie, you both mentioned just in passing, you've worked with each other, Iowa and Iowa State, not competing, but actually helping each other. And I'm curious, do you see an opportunity for some of this a la carte collaboration? Because, maybe Iowa State's really great at the, economics class, and Iowa's got the engineering one. Why try and duplicate? Do you see a path where that could work? Are there discussions happening with that?
Zach, we've had those conversations together with Big Ten schools and our Regent schools for many years. I think I watched the session yesterday, and Reagan Smock from the University of Iowa, student government representative, I think what she said was, she kind of contemplated and she said, I don't really hear that from my colleagues. We know we can get a great program at something at Iowa State, so we go to Iowa State. That's where we develop our community. That's where our identity comes. When we first came into this, before the rest of the room came in, there was I'm an alum from Iowa State. There's that identity people have sometimes. I don't argue that there might be a business case for doing some of that sharing. I think that we have examples where we've done some of those sorts of things over the years, and we should always look toward that if it's sufficient. But I think we also have to decide what our students are asking for and need and want out of this experience. And Reagan's comments really, they resonated with me yesterday because they were coming right from the student voice.
Any other thoughts on that before we depart? Okay, with that pause, then Jonathan, I'll talk to you a little bit about structure, and others can jump in too. But you've operated on a block schedule, and I'm curious, with the transition, have things like, what the campus experience looks like. I would think maybe technology and the delivery of some of this curriculum, as you start to think about the future, does what a semester looks like have the potential to change? And I'm curious, kind of those thoughts of how you, as you start to think about the future, how do you bring that technology experience with that in-person experience? How do you see that evolving?
Yeah, well, thank you. And that ties in a little bit, I think, to the a la carte question, which is I think there's an opportunity here for the traditional sort of academic calendar on the agrarian model to be completely obliterated. And I would love to see that happen, frankly, because there's one thing we know about Gen Z students. They're looking for flexibility. They want an education on their schedule, on their timeline, in the media or the medium that they prefer. So the block system, fortunately, right, one course every 3.5 weeks is a eminently flexible structure. And one, I've always said it's really great in times of health and prosperity. It turns out it's really great in a global pandemic for a whole range of reasons. I mean, especially with classes on average of only 16 students together 3.5 weeks, it minimizes student-to-student contact, lots of great pieces to it. I think the technological part, frankly, is really exciting because it will allow us to tap into other scholars around the world for 3.5 week periods. I mean, it's sort of the ultimate immersive experience. Again, for me, the question is, how do we offer and ensure that our students have what increasingly we're thinking of as a curriculum of one, right? How to personalize this on a per student basis, where technology is an integral part of every class. And again, I think that we have the ability to now bring people into the classroom for 3.5 week periods very intensively and intentionally that again, the one course calendar that we have makes possible. Again, at the more granular level, we're still thinking through how on a day-to-day basis can we use technology. So again, so that students come into the classroom not for lectures, but they're coming in because they've gotten some foundation of knowledge already, potentially in a virtual format, and they're ready to extend that with discussion and conversation.
I can continue to stir the pot a little bit if you want, and just say, when Jonathan talks about the fact that our students expect a seamless technological back-end experience, 100% right. The only thing that worries me is everything we see about what's going on the internet says that you're going to get one person who gets the best back-end experience, and they're going to be the ones who attract all the students. That it doesn't make sense to have 5,000 different colleges and universities invest the money to create a great back-end experience. Once you get one of those, you're going to get the students, and once the students adopt it, you're going to be able to improve the platform. And we're going to end up not with a bunch of independent booksellers, but with something that looks more like Amazon.
So Michael, if I can just build off of this, and this goes to the partnership question. So for example, Yale University has this famous course on happiness.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the possibilities, for example, that Cornell College could have a course that relies on the lectures that are online for that course, and then build off of that in our own in-class experiences? I mean, that to me is the ultimate partnership, where we're not reinventing the wheel, but we're looking at the best of the best that's out there in the country and the world. And we're building, and we're using that as the foundation of the platform from which we might go and build and add on to it in a different direction.
I think that's where we're heading. I think our biggest obstacle is faculty like me, because one of the readings I use in class is an old New York Times article about technology in the business school. And one of the questions that gets asked in it is, how many calculus professors do we have in college today? And how many calculus professors do we need to teach online in an online world? And Jonathan, what you're talking about is, let's take the best professor of happiness in the world and scale her. And that's going to be great, but there are going to be a lot of other professors who we don't have room for you anymore. And I think we, the faculty, are going to fight that.
I think, perhaps even more important, though, is the relationships that are built on campus, both between students, but also students and faculty. I know probably for most of us, there was a faculty member who encouraged us to go on, get our master's degree, get our PhD, and continue to teach the next generation. And I just think the value of those relationships can't be underestimated in the physical environment, and those opportunities for students to really dig in and do research, especially with specialized equipment. When we think about some of the STEM courses that we have that are just much more difficult to do online.
Sara, I want to expound on that just a little bit more, in that students that learn how to do that, find mentors, connect to those mentors, they're going to continue to do that throughout their lifetime too. So it's an important learning, and it's not just, I remember that mentor from college, but I've learned the importance of those mentors, and I'll have them for the rest of my life. So yeah, I have to, a +1 to the human connection.
The challenge, though, to play devil's advocate for a second, is that, well, you have those valuable connections on campus. You also have the opportunity, as has been discussed already, you can invite a guest panelist from anywhere in. So, arguably, those connections could happen. Here I am, a little kid sitting in Iowa, and, the leader in this field noticed me because, we connected at a comment or as a guest lecture. And so I could see that working both ways.
I think, though, it's the structured environment that faculty mentor can help provide someone. So, I'm a historian of dress, of all things. It's not just, encouraging a student or saying, yes, that's a great idea, but it's also showing that those students, here's how you get resources. Here's how you critically analyze those resources. Here's input on your paper to make a stronger argument, or have you considered this? And I think we see that in so many disciplines. It's not just the content, right? With online is great for that. Here's the lecture notes, but it's also that feedback that is so key when we think about learning.
Do you think that, are all levels of higher education, though, at the same risk? Because, you could see, to the idea of gen eds, or those classes that are kind of early in the cycle, maybe those are more disrupted by this, idea of scalability. And then on the other end of the spectrum, do your kind of specialty areas maybe have a little bit more insulation from some of that?
Well, just to build off of what Sara and Maggie have said, I think that even at the sort of 100, 200 level, gen ed level courses, the availability of technology can be used or deployed in a way that faculty have more time to mentor and advise students.
Mhm.
I mean, I think that I couldn't. I join them in knowing students go to a college. They want to be known. They want to be
Yep.
understood. They want us to meet them where they are.
Mhm.
To me, it's a question of whether there's a more efficient use of faculty time, so that there's some amount of education that can happen before students come into the classroom or meet with faculty, so that then there is more time for mentoring. There is more time for, I mean, there's a I don't know how much higher ed spends thinking about the neuroscience of learning, right? The 70-20-10 rule, that students learn 70% by doing, 20% by interaction with others, and 10% by lecturing, by hearing lectures, right? And so I'd like to think that technology can be used so that we're spending more time on the 70 and the 20%. And to me, that's the mentoring, that's the advising, that's the doing, that's the interaction part that I think is critical for students.
How optimistic, Jonathan, you lead a campus. How optimistic are you that you can get the faculty behind that? Or to Michael's point, hey, we're going to resist some of this. How do you motivate? I mean, are you sensing an exhaustion, or is this a renaissance where, hey, yeah, I'm right there with you?
I think we're all exhausted. I mean, we've been all, foot to the pedal for, well, I mean, we didn't have a summer last year. It's basically, we're on 2 years of straight work here. By the same token, I think for a lot of people, this work has been eye-opening and joyful. And I think that we can see that the sky's the limit right now. Will the Cornell faculty resist? Well, I don't think so, because I don't have the answers. They have the answers. I mean, I can state some lofty visionary goals or aspirations, but they've got to, they know more than I do about the effective teaching. They need to take this and process it and figure out what it means for our students and for student learning. I am sure that the personalized mentorship and advising piece of teaching is not going to disappear in the near term for us. The question is, how can we rethink our work with technology in a way that we can do more mentoring and advising, have more conversations with our students, let them have more conversations, frankly, with each other.
Again, in my role as the annoying person on the panel, I'll just say every single industry before it's disrupted says no one will ever take the superior quality of my product and consume something inferior. One of the case studies I teach is Encyclopedia Britannica. And Encyclopedia Britannica was absolutely confident that no one would ever stop buying the high quality Britannica for something cheap and inferior like an encyclopedia on CD-ROM. The entertainment industry companies I studied, in 2015 were saying people will give up food and a roof over their head before they'll give up cable TV. Our business will never be disrupted. I'm not convinced.
So Michael, can I ask a question? I would be interested in your insights about how you see, if you believe that the sort of mentorship, advising, conversational piece is important for our students. How do you see that merging or blending or playing out with technology? I mean, do you see it as an either or? Do you see it as complementary?
Yeah, so I can imagine what I saw with my daughter when she took Outlier was you've got a recorded version of Hannah Fry and Tim Chartier, I finally remembered his name, and John Urschel. And then you've actually got a much lower paid assistant who is interacting with the students in an online chat area answering their individual questions. Is that as good as what you'd get in the classroom? No, but it costs $500. I'm sorry, it costs $50 instead of $5,000, and it's good enough for a decent amount of the market. Maggie, you want to yell at me, and you can feel free if you want.
Not at all, not at all. I have an MBA. I understand about business disruptions, and I don't think for a minute there isn't going to be disruption. We've just watched disruption for the last year. To somebody's point, I think, Jonathan, you used the word joy. That's what I'm watching, faculty who've let go of that fear of things to try new things. So yeah, there is going to be disruption. It's hard for me to compare the kinds of lifelong relationships and identities that we create for students in whatever institution they're at. Not all of them. Some of them want that, some of them don't. But a majority of our 18, 19-year-olds, I think, would say that there's some piece of that. How do we compare that to giving up cable TV or, yes, there's areas for disruption. I just don't know at what level. It's on a continuum. But there's still this human piece that we're doing that I don't think is something we should underestimate.
Yeah, and I think Michael's mentioning the financial piece. We know that Gen Z students, families, especially now in light of the pandemic, are very cost sensitive. Mm-hmm. And I think the movement away from a personalized or a bespoke educational experience is also going to be a function of the finances. I mean, schools that can say to students, you will graduate with no debt or little debt, will have more flexibility in terms of the modes that they use for educational their offerings.
I don't know, Zack, if you want, I can tweak just a little bit more. One of the really interesting things about writing the Atlantic piece is the feedback from outside the academy was overwhelmingly positive and frequently expressed a great deal of anger and frustration towards the institution of higher learning and our cost and our inflexibility. The feedback from inside the academy was almost universally negative and frequently expressed a great deal of anger and frustration towards anyone who would question the way we do business. And so I gave a talk at 10 different universities after the thing came out and just, tried to interact with my colleagues on what are you seeing? And the objection I heard in every single venue was online education is inherently inferior to what we do on campus, that what students want are the rubbing elbows and the individual personalized experience. That's why they pay us the money. And I got so tired of that question that I started to say, okay, so online education was worse and people really miss out on the in-person experience. How much worse do you think it was? And the answer was, well, I don't know if I could put a number on it, but, at least 20% worse. And it might've even been 50% worse. And then what I'd say is, okay, so how much of a tuition discount did you offer your students for what you know to be a 20 to 50% worse experience? And if the answer is 0, then, is it really worse? Or can you justify the statement that online education is worse and our students are desperate to get back on campus while we're still charging exactly the same price for an online education?
I think at Iowa, we would never say that online education is worse. And it certainly wasn't in the work that we did to develop our online programs and courses. They are the highest quality. And students want a choice. There is no, everybody's in this box, everybody's in that box. Again, it's on a continuum. This year, I might need several online courses, and next year, I might want something else as I get higher up in my degree. So I'm not arguing at all that online courses are at some level inferior. They absolutely shouldn't be. There's no reason for them to be inferior. They're just not always the answer for every single student at every point in their life.
That's where I'm at. I just think if it's true that online education can be as good at potentially a lower price as what we deliver on campus, then I think the on-campus experience is going to change radically. Harvard's going to be just fine. Yale's going to be just fine. But it's not obvious to me that we need 5,000 different institutions of higher education to teach if online becomes a viable option. That's my only point.
Especially with the declining, the demographic cliff that's about to hit us in 5 years.
Well, and I think this has been a fascinating conversation, and I want to get to the question of, if you got to mad scientist this, as you're thinking about next, year, what pieces of online learning do you take with? Which ones do you leave behind? Or, and what areas, do you want to continue to invest in that development? Because maybe where we're at right now is good, but there are ideas of making it great. As you're emerging out of pandemic, what's exciting? Where do you see the horizon?
I'll say that again, that the head of Outlier came and talked to my class last semester, and what he said is they are heavily investing in understanding the student level data and student level outcomes, and using that to design a platform that best encourages Maggie to learn the next section of calculus, and Jonathan to learn the next section of calculus, and Sara to learn the next section of calculus, even though they might all be motivated by different things. So it's all about using the data to create a personalized experience, at least in his view.
There are amazing parallels to journalism, frankly, in a lot of this. So as a leader in a disrupted industry, we see, the 51% of online media subscriptions to the New York Times. Well, we're not the New York Times. And so, I think some of your comments there are there are parallels that, we've been living through in the professional side. So that's fascinating. Thank you for that.
I think as we, continue to offer courses in the online environment, we also strove for high quality courses, and it just becomes really thinking through which courses need to be online. Why do students need certain courses? I think the flexibility that they offer is huge for students, but that there are opportunities to deepen opportunities for engagement online, deepen opportunities for students to interact with one another in that online environment. But I know personally, I'm looking forward to the on-campus experience. And I know a lot of our students and a lot of our faculty are as well. So I think it's really just finding that balance in what the students as well as the faculty feel is best for them for their disciplines.
And I think beyond the courses that we deliver, faculty and students have realized that they can connect through the technology, and actually in some ways better than they did on campus. Students have jobs. They can't always make it to an office hours with a faculty member. Faculty member sometimes can't offer office hours in the afternoon, and it's better for their students for them to do it in the evening after they've put their kids to bed, and then they're online for 2 hours with their students. So it's opened up a whole new way of people communicating with one another and using that flexibility that's outside of the classroom. Those are important touch bases too, advisors and getting to know other students in the class that we didn't have the time or energy to do before, and this opens that up for us. And I'm seeing faculty and advisors and administrators do this all over campus, and that's exciting just by itself. It's a small thing, but it's that human connection again.
Yeah. And I mean, Cornell is not my Cornell, not Cornell University. We're not Harvard or Yale, but we will continue to be rooted in the in-person experience. And we're talking a lot about technology as the wraparound to that in-person experience. And in curricular, co-curricular, extracurricular, social, student life, residential life, that's where I think it's headed for us. But I'm acutely aware that I don't know what I don't know, and I'm very excited to see how technology develops, because we have to be receptive to the best that it can offer us. We have to be.
I would imagine that there's going to be a period where you're going to start to see that investment in technology, but then you've got to have that reconciliation of okay, what's that in person, and finding that right balance and that wraparound. And I would guess that that's the next kind of couple of years. If not, to Jonathan, to your point at the beginning, maybe longer, maybe the decade. So Well, I want to be respectful of time. I appreciate everybody staying on. Thank you to everyone for joining us today. I have a couple closing announcements, but first, thank you to Sara, thank you, Maggie, thank you, Jonathan, and Michael for taking time today. It's a fascinating conversation. I could geek out about this stuff for hours, but I'll spare everyone that experience. And so just in closing, as Higher Ed Week comes to an end, we're proud to announce that the annual conference is scheduled for October 14th and 15th, and it is free for public attendance. And so we want to get as many people as we can participating in the main conference. We'll have 9 tracks filled with sessions and keynotes. Everything will be virtual and it's free. And so we're trying to find ways to maybe do some in-person experience. You can register online at iowaideas.com. We have a couple keynotes to announce. David Gould, the visiting professor at the University of Iowa Public Policy Center. Peggy Whitson, retired NASA, now at SpaceX astronaut, will be joining us speaking about STEM, as well as frankly fascinating experiences both as an astronaut and now into the aerospace manufacturing and space transportation. And so we're excited to welcome her. We want to have folks register as early as possible, just so that we can continue to send announcements. And if it's anything like last year, we had plenty of curveballs to the experience, given the trade show. And we would just like to have folks in and as we make announcements. So with that, I appreciate everyone taking time. And thank you again to the panel. Fascinating conversation.
Thank you,
Thank
Zack.
you.
Thank you.
Very
Thanks,
much.
Zach. Thanks for putting
Thank
this
you.
together.
Take care, everyone.
Cool.